So not surprising, we saved the last panel for the most important issue that was in the minds of people for a very long time. I think before the Supreme Court decision, we all thought this entire conference would be on the implementation of DAPA and expanded DACA and DAPA. Indeed, some of you who were here last year, we had an entire panel on how we thought the Supreme Court was going to rule and what the implication of that is going to be. There was a major Supreme Court decision, which a lot of people think will land up becoming one of the most consequential Supreme Court decisions, which kept intact the injunction against the implementation of DAPA and extended DACA. And in our precious use of punnery, we're going to call it supreme lack of clarity. So essentially, this is a panel to discuss both the legal and the political fallout from the Supreme Court's decision in U.S. versus Texas. And to inform this debate, it's an extraordinary group of people we have collected for you for the last panel. David Shahoulian, on my furthest right, is currently the Deputy General Counsel of the DHS, whose job is to put all the small fires out at DHS on immigration issues to opining on major policy issues. Before he had the job, he was both the Chief Counsel and Counsel at the Subcommittee on Immigration on the U.S. House of Representatives. So he brings both an administration's and lawmakers' perspective to this debate. Steve Legomsky, for us immigration lawyers, is considered as close to a sage in the field as you can find. He is he is a Chair Emeritus Professor at the Washington University School of Law at St. Louis. He is the co-author of a major textbook on immigration, and for 2 years was Chief Counsel at the U.S. CIS. Cristina is considered, by all measures, one of the most dynamic and effective young leaders in the immigration rights movement today. She is both the co-founder and director of the United We Dream, one of the organizations that was at least considered key for President Obama's announcement of the DACA program. And last but not least is Becky Tallent, whose job now is head of government relations at Dropbox, which may seem odd to you. She's not here to tell you that your Dropboxes are full. But it's her life prior to the Dropbox that is of intrigue to this group. She was a very important member of the staff on immigration issues on the Senate and the House side. She was assistant to Speaker Boehner on policy before the Speaker left his job. Before that, she was chief of staff to Senator McCain, and highly involved in series of iterations on immigration legislation, while Senator McCain was co-author with Senator Kennedy. But most of all, recently, Washington Post called her, I'm sure you've been called a lot of things, but called her the
not all of them good for
leading immigration expert within the GOP. So thank you to all of you for being here. But we'll start with David, just because we give deference to administration on these panels. So David.
You're the only one.
So frankly, we thought this would be the time when most of us in this gathering would be implementing DAPA and expanded DACA, and instead they're attending this conference. So how did we get here? From the announcement of your secretary in November of 2014 to the present.
So if I can, I just want to set the stage a little bit. I want to talk a little bit about my time on the Hill and what I kind of found when I got to DHS. So it's a platitude to say that our immigration laws are broken. I think we all understand it to some degree. I did not understand how fundamentally broken they were, to the extent to which they were broken, until I arrived at DHS. And I just want to set this stage. I think this helps people understand what we did and why we did it. So I get to DHS, and we all know about the 11 million people, and I think most of us know that also Although there are 11 million people in the United States who are unlawfully present and are subject to removal, DHS is resourced to remove a small fraction of those individuals. What I think people know to a lesser degree is the fact that those are not the only people that are subject to removal. On top of the 11 or 11.5 million, we also have new people arriving or trying to arrive every day that are subject to removal, and it's our responsibility to remove them as well, in addition to those individuals. And we also have individuals who are unlawfully and lawfully here who commit crimes and also make themselves subject to removal because of those crimes. So not only are we resourced to remove a fraction of those individuals, but it's even a smaller fraction when you consider that there are additional individuals that are added to that every year. And in addition to that, both morally and politically and congressionally, we are essentially directed, particularly through appropriations, but also authorizing provisions in the law, to focus our removal efforts on securing the border, new entrants at the border, and to focus particularly on persons convicted of crimes by the severity of the crime is the way that the law speaks about it. So I get there, of course, and I mean, this has been true before I got there, so it's not like I created any of this, but that is all true, but we're also facing tremendous headwinds at that time, headwinds that we hadn't faced before with respect to the populations that Congress and that, to be honest, and I believe morally and politically, we're also directed to really focus our removal efforts on. At the border, we have an unprecedented shift in demographics, people arriving at the border. Our laws are written to kind of face what we have historically seen, which are Mexican nationals coming across the border, and our laws are written to deal with large populations of Mexican nationals attempting to cross the border. We have expedited removal and a few other provisions. It's pretty inexpensive to remove a Mexican national that we encounter either at the border or at a port of entry. It is significantly, exponentially more difficult and more expensive to remove someone who is not Mexican who arrives at the southern border. And what we've seen over the last few years is a precipitous drop, a real drop in the number, partly because of our enforcement efforts, but partly also because of the Mexican economy, a drop in Mexican nationals attempting to cross the border. And what we've seen is a significant increase in the number of non-Mexican nationals crossing the border. And that has meant a significant change in the way that we resource border enforcement, and also the length of time it takes us to remove nationals or people that we encounter at the southern border. With regards to people convicted of crimes, we have seen over the last 5 years, jurisdictions basically stop cooperating with us across most of the major jurisdictions in which immigrants live because of our immigration enforcement efforts. And we've seen, we've also been to some degree hemmed in our actions by the federal courts, both with regards to people we encounter at the border and people with criminal convictions. And our ability to remove even them has been significantly altered and hampered. So that's an additional reality that we were faced with at that time. So taking all of that into account, this administration, the president and the secretary decided they were going to tackle all of those problems holistically. What to do about the 11 million, what to do about border enforcement considering the changing demographics at the border, what to do about aliens convicted of crimes. In an effort to further secure the border, because it's a real priority for this secretary, among other things. I mean, I know we're not going to get credit for it in many circles, but I can tell you that the secretary every single morning looks at the border apprehension numbers. He reads the intelligence of what we're seeing in Central America and in Mexico and from other places, and he just cares about that issue as much as anything else that he does. Anyway, we focused on all of those issues, and we came out with a package on November 20, 2014, of executive actions to address issues across the board. One of them was a full reprioritization of our enforcement efforts. We moved resources from the interior to the borders. We focused the remaining interior resources on people convicted of crimes. Again, we were no longer easily getting individuals from local jurisdictions as they were being released. Instead, we had to go out and, through pretty large enforcement efforts, find individuals that we were before we were just having transferred directly to us. We also took on a massive effort to win back jurisdictions with regards to cooperation, and we also, on top of everything else, tried to focus on dealing realistically with the population that was going to remain behind. And just to again put this in perspective, when we started the whole thing, there was already a fraction. I mean, our resources can only remove a fraction of the undocumented population here. But when you're focusing on new border enforcement, new entrants, and when you're taking into account the difficulties removing those individuals, and if you're focusing on people convicted of crimes, including people that are legally here, there were even fewer resources once you take all of that into account that was left for the undocumented. So part of the package included taking that population or those populations within the 11 million that were the lowest of the lowest priority, and those are the people that had been here for a long time and had either who came through no fault of their own or who had U.S. citizen or lawful permanent resident children in the United States. Those are the people that were going to be, again, they were the lowest priority, and we wanted to set them aside. We wanted to have them, apply, go through background checks. We would learn who they were, and they would get work authorization. We would also take them out of the underground economy. We thought that was good for America, and then we would set those people aside, and we wouldn't have to focus resources on them, and we would do all of that with using their resources rather than our own. And that's what we went to do. And as most of you know, we were quickly sued by 26 states. Who brought the lawsuit in a very smart venue. They filed in Brownsville in the Southern District of Texas. At the time, there were only 2 active judges, one of whom was a senior judge and wasn't taking cases. So they essentially guaranteed that a particular judge, who we'd been in front of many times, would take the case. And as you all know, he issued a preliminary injunction. I will add just a few more facts before I stop talking. During the course of the litigation, there were a number of Fifth Circuit judges that looked at the case and Supreme Court justices that looked at the case. And I just want to just point out this fact, right? So there were 2 times where the preliminary injunction came up for review in front of the Fifth Circuit. In both those cases, there were the same 2 judges on both of those panels that ruled in favor of keeping the preliminary injunction, so therefore against our policies. But there were 2 different judges that sat in dissent in both of those cases that would have upheld those policies. So essentially, there was a 2-2 tie in the Fifth Circuit as far as we're concerned. And then the case went up to the Supreme Court on cert and faced an 8-justice court at that time, and for all intents and purposes, we understand there were 4 justices that likely would have struck the policy down, and 4 justices that would have upheld the policy. So another tie in front of the Supreme Court. But so it is Judge Hainan in Brownsville that has so far been able to stop the policy from taking effect.
Great. So let me stick with you for a second. So what are your plans for the rest of the administration to deal with Judge Hainan?
So I'm going to escape that question pretty quickly by saying that, after the Supreme Court ruled and issued, no decision, it was their summary opinion that essentially keeps the Fifth Circuit opinion in place. We filed a motion for rehearing before the Supreme Court, and that remains pending with the Supreme Court. Hasn't acted yet, hasn't dismissed it or necessarily taken it either. So we continue to wait. And the Judge Hainan has stayed proceedings in the district court until the Supreme Court rules. In his last order also, depending on how the Supreme Court rules, gives the parties another 30 days to meet and confer to decide how to move forward. But so there have been no decisions yet on how to move forward.
Great. So keeping that executive action apart, is there any other plan for the remainder of your administration to do any more executive actions affecting the unauthorized?
Nothing that hasn't. Let me just say that there are things that are on the table that we announced. So there are things that we are looking at that may affect some small portion of those individuals. So we announced a long time ago. We put out, for example, for for public comment, some guidance on what constitutes extreme hardship for purposes of getting 3 and 10-year bar waivers, which are statutorily authorized. So we're still working on that guidance, and we're working on a few other things, but there's, as far as I know, nothing that we're working on that hasn't already been announced.
Right. So, Steve, let me turn to you. The Supreme Court kept intact the injunction, a nationwide injunction. But in August of this year, a lawsuit was brought in federal district court in New York challenging the nationwide injunction. Two-part question. Does, from your perspective, that lawsuit have any chances of success? And as a sage in this field, do you think it should ever succeed?
Well, you put a lot of pressure on me. First of all, let me say I thought David's description of both the forest and the trees was excellent. Because I'm no longer in government, I can afford to be much more irresponsible even than I usually am. So I can speak just directly to that. The lawsuit you're referring to is the Vidal case. It's V as in Victor, I-D-A-L, filed in the federal district court in New York. There are a lot of narrow technical issues presented by the case, but the big question in the case is whether a federal court in one jurisdiction may set aside a nationwide injunction issued by a court in another jurisdiction. And if it has that power, should it do so in this case? I have a fairly strongly held view about whether it was proper to make the injunction nationwide. And continuing along the line of irresponsibility, I'll just preface my comment by saying that I feel very strongly that the executive actions in question, in essence, are well within the administration's legal authority, and therefore no injunction should have been issued at all. But I take your question as focusing on whether, if it was otherwise okay to issue an injunction, there was a further valid basis for making it nationwide. I believe there was not. The governing legal principle here is that an injunction is an extraordinary judicial remedy. And that means, among other things, as the courts have routinely said, that when a court issues an injunction, it is supposed to issue it in the narrowest possible terms. It should be no broader than is necessary to protect the interests of the plaintiff. The question in this case is whether Texas has an interest in making sure that the executive actions don't operate in other states. Should it have been limited to Texas, or should it have been nationwide, or something in between? It's hard for me to see how Texas is hurt by people receiving executive action in the state of New York, but in fairness to Texas, they have made one significant constitutional argument. And their argument is that there's a whole long line of cases before the Supreme Court. They span more than 100 years, in which the court has consistently said that on matters of immigration, it is imperative that the nation speak with a single voice. That part of Texas's argument is correct, and you can easily see why the court would say this. It doesn't want 50 different sets of immigration laws and policies operating simultaneously. The key, however, at least in my view, is this. In every single case in which the Supreme Court has talked about the importance of uniform nationwide policies, its point has been that this is why these policies have to be set by the national government rather than by individual states. It seems to me it stands this principle on its head to say now that one state alone, in this case Texas, gets to dictate what those nationwide uniform policies are supposed to be, let alone that one federal district judge in Brownsville, Texas, and I mean no disrespect to Brownsville, gets to make that decision. So that's one thing. And now maybe Texas could say, well, you know, it's true, we can't come up with a convincing argument as to why the harms that we claim we're going to incur wouldn't be prevented by limiting the injunction to Texas. But there are 25 other states, as David has said, that have joined us, and we need a nationwide injunction to protect them. Well, first of all, none of those other states have yet to demonstrate even that they have been injured by DAPA, and therefore that they even have legal standing to sue in the first place. But second, even if they did, and even if the argument otherwise made sense on the merits, it seems to me that the very most that argument could logically justify would be extending the injunction to those 26 states, and not to the 24 other states, and certainly not to the majority of those 24 other states that not only don't feel harmed by DAPA, but feel affirmatively benefited by it, and for that reason filed an amicus brief actually encouraging the court to deny the request for the injunction. So it seems to me there is one other little point that Texas has made. Maybe it's not such a little point. Texas says, well, you know, if the injunction were limited to Texas, then undocumented immigrants could simply move from Texas, relocate in another state, take up permanent residence there, and obtain DAPA. Well, if Texas is going to be honest and consistent in its arguments, its whole argument for standing has been these undocumented immigrants are hurting our state, and it kills us even more to have to spend money issuing driver's licenses to them. So you would think Texas would be thrilled if the effect of limiting the injunction to Texas is that people leave. Now, maybe you could work down the road to other scenarios. Maybe Texas thinks that what some people will cleverly do is relocate in another state, take up residence there, get DAPA where the injunction doesn't apply, and then move back to Texas for the privilege of getting a Texas driver's license. That doesn't seem like a scenario that will occur with enough frequency to offset the harms that these other states are suffering by reason of the injunction, but perhaps that's what Texas is thinking as well.
David, in fairness, since you're the government lawyer here, do you agree with Steve on nationwide injunction?
Sure. I mean, it's been our position all along in the briefing that the district court should not have issued a nationwide injunction.
Okay. Well, that's quick.
And the government has said this in its brief.
You asked me
Are you done? Or
yes, I'm done.
I was going to add that
Before I get in trouble.
speak to 2017 after the election. Steve, to you, it's either going to be a Trump presidency or a Clinton presidency, I guess we assume. I take it there's nothing to prevent President Trump from rescinding the executive action while the case is pending. So answer that question quickly. Second, if there is a President Clinton presidency and she has expressed her support of the action, what choices does she have to help to get this implemented in light of the litigation?
Well, that's a great question. I think in part the answer depends on what happens in any intervening litigation. First, we do have the pending government petition for rehearing before the Supreme Court that David has described. Second, there is the Vidal case, which will tell us whether it's possible to lift the injunction outside Texas. And third, going in the other direction, we don't have any way to know whether Texas or perhaps other states are planning to bring an action to enjoin DACA, the original DACA program, which was not challenged in U.S. v. Texas. If they do, then presumably it too would be brought in Judge Hanen's court, which doesn't automatically mean Texas wins, but pretty close. Assuming none of those things happen, let's say the government's petition for rehearing is denied, let's say the Vidal case is dismissed for whatever reason, then the administration would have to decide whether there are administrative options it ought to pursue. It seems to me that as to those, there are both legal constraints and strategic constraints. The big legal constraint, again, is the nationwide injunction. Does it apply? Is there a way of distinguishing the particular program? And maybe the best legal strategies for the government to pursue if it elects to go that route would be, first of all, to use the formal notice and comment rulemaking procedure, which Judge Hanen faulted the government for not using in the case of DAPA. I continue to believe it's not legally required, but whether I'm right or wrong, there are certainly judges who think that it is, and it might be wise to use it just in case. And secondly, one of the objections that Judge Hanen and even the Fifth Circuit had in the case of DAPA was that they read the program, at least in its implementation, as being less discretionary than it purported to be. So maybe a future program would give greater prominence to the discretion. Maybe instead of saying the threshold criteria are 5 years of prior residence, brought here before age 16, et cetera, maybe it would say, here are the factors that the agency will take into account anytime anybody individually requests deferred action. And those factors include, how long have you been here? How old were you when you came? Are you elderly now? Do you have a disability? Do you have family ties in the U.S.? And if it did that, it's possible it could bring in even the parents of DACA recipients who up to now have not been covered by any of these programs.
Okay, so I'll let you two lawyers take a rest and moving to the politics on this. So Christina, let me start with you. This was obviously, you folks fought very hard for this, and you had a big success in DACA, and then this was also expected to be a great success. It didn't happen. So tell us first what has been the reaction of the communities to the decision, and what is your plan to deal with the outcome of this litigation for the rest of this administration?
Thanks for MPI for putting this together and for having us here. It was heartbreaking. I have my own parents who are eligible for the program, and in United We Dream, most of our members have family members that were eligible for the program. And so having family members, my mom, my dad included, feeling let down by the court decision was a really difficult moral moment, and for the spirit of our communities. One, because the news that once again, their lives and their experiences and their vulnerability to deportation is not important and feeling played by the politics, even though the community understands that the Supreme Court is involved now. For them, and for people like my parents, it's all about the politics and not feeling like their lives really matter in the context of the political debate on immigration. So I think, unfortunately, the non-decision from the court had that sort of reaffirmation of that feeling. And at the same time, I will say what you saw immediately, particularly in communities that are a lot more organized, is a desire to say, we need something. If the court is gonna say no to us, if Congress is gonna say no to us, we need to figure something out and we want something. So immediately you saw community members coming out, either in press conferences or community gatherings, or even direct actions across the country saying, if we don't have protection from deportation, deportations need to stop, our families need to continue to be together, and we need immigration reform. And that's what you heard. Now, when we hear the term immigration reform, for different people in our community, it means different things. But basically, what's been really clear from our community is that there's urgency about the situation changing. You have people like my own parents who have been here for over 16 years undocumented, and they have gone through the cycle of, President Fox at the time and Bush were meeting right before 9/11 happened, and they were talking about an immigration reform deal, and there was hope there, and then, we know what happened. And then there was the 2007 debate around immigration reform and how that failed, and that community failed again. Then you have 2010, then you have 2013 again. And so I feel like there is both an urgency, but also skepticism about even the promises that candidates like Hillary Clinton have made about immigration reform. So organizations like United We Dream feel greatly encouraged to hear that if she was to become president, she will prioritize immigration reform. But there is a lot of skepticism to overcome in the community. Will she really deliver? We experienced something similar under an Obama administration of commitments about immigration reform. The issue ended up not being a priority. We did not see a bill after the House and Republicans stalled the process in 2013, and then we have seen almost 3 million deportations. And in the midst of all of that, DACA has been a gleam of hope, but I think that what we are up against right now is urgency and really desperation from the community to see something. Whether that's administratively or whether that's legislatively in 2017, I think for the community, it's about a solution that is going to change their lives. It's about people like my parents feeling like after 16 years of working here undocumented and raising a family, they can finally leave without fear. And that is the urgency that our communities have. So for us, the mandate from the community and our membership is really clear. Our organizing and our advocacy needs to focus on figuring out how, whether administratively or whether legislatively, we're gonna be able to get a win for our communities. So even though there's encouragement about the conversations around immigration reform from one candidate, and there's also the factor of Trump and how that has had a huge impact on the community, and the risk that you have pointed out in this conversation that if Trump was to become president, we will even lose the protection that we have of about 800,000 young people that have DACA. And so it's a moment where the community feels and knows that there's a lot at stake. But therefore, I think the community is feeling like we cannot believe all the words that we're hearing, but rather prepare us and organize us to push folks for actions. And if Hillary Clinton was to become president, I think it is expected for her to be a real leader and to deliver beyond the words and the commitments that she's made, but also to be different than what we have seen in the Obama administration from day one, particularly when it has come to the deportations and the violations that we constantly see from ICE and Border Patrol agents in our communities. Because with the recent administration and an increase in rates, I feel like really the fear in our community has increased. So there is an expectation for what a potential Clinton administration will be like, and what in our community expecting that administration to be different from day one.
So what would Secretary Clinton have to do to get a more galvanized Latino vote, as President Obama got after the implementation of DACA?
You know, we know that immigration, for particularly the Latino and the immigrant vote, it's a key issue. I mean, poll after poll, we have seen that. In the last presidential cycle, we saw how DACA was actually really helpful for Obama to get reelected, and how that invigorated the Latino vote to come out to vote, and for the president to get reelection and get huge support from the Latino and immigrant voter base. So I believe in a similar way, voters do not only want to hear words, and I think there is a huge encouragement from the commitments and the conversations that we have heard from Hillary Clinton, but there is a question and skepticism about the action. So what can a potential Clinton administration do to galvanize and to mobilize the community and to move the community beyond the skepticism? Number one, she could be completely different than Obama. And there's a whole host of things that she could do in terms of using her administrative authority or administrative powers to, for example, close detention centers and family detention, review enforcement priorities, et cetera, which would send an immediate signal to our community that this administration is going to be different, that they're not going to be targeted by ICE and Border Patrol agents as they have been under the Obama administration, and that she's serious about the commitment of caring for our families and caring for immigrant communities. So I think that that will be a very critical signal to send to the community from day one, so that you could even have a galvanized community that is going to engage in a potential immigration reform debate. Because you don't want just the commitment of Hillary Clinton and the potential work with both Republicans and Democrats on this to be part of the political play. You need the community to be engaged and to be galvanized around this. And for her to be able to win that and lead that strategy, there needs to be an immediate signal on day one that she'll be different to galvanize the community.
And to be completely nonpartisan, if President Trump is the president in 2017, and he has already indicated, as you said, that he would rescind DACA, what is your strategy going to be?
Well, as good strategists and community organizers, we're preparing for either one scenario. And United We Dream has launched two critical things that we work with many of the partners actually that I see here within the immigrant rights movement and the immigrant rights advocacy community. And number one is empowering our communities to know how to protect themselves and just about their rights. And so having deportation defense networks all across the country, we're testing a model like this in Houston, Texas, which hosts the county in the United States that deports the most number of people in the country. And it is about having communities that are able to protect themselves from deportation. Number two, we have launched a hotline that is available to the community so that the community can report deportations and ICE and Border Patrol activity that would allow us to keep accountability within the agency. So all of that's to say that if Trump was to become president, we are really seeing, if we have been concerned and outraged about the out-of-control enforcement that we have seen in the last few years, it's going to be much more worse. He's committed to triple the capacity of ICE agents and the agency overall. He has committed to build a wall. He has committed to deport massively our families. And so for us, enabling the community to be protected will be key. But number two, we know that there's also a very lively debate about sanctuary cities or communities across the country. And for us, that's going to be a localized movement that needs to be led by our communities in every city and every state across the country, so that even within our cities and communities and states, we could protect our communities from an out of control and even more scary administration under Trump.
Right. So Becky, no pressure. You're the leading immigration expert within the GOP, as the Washington Post would say. So the keeping the injunction in place, a lot of people could argue that Republicans won this debate. They feel vindicated against what they thought was overreach by the president. Having gotten that victory, don't you think the Republicans now feel the pressure to do something on this issue? And what do you think that is likely to be in 2017?
To be honest, the Republican crowds that were celebrating the DACA, DAPA injunction are probably not the communities within the Republican Party that are feeling any kind of pressure to work on this issue. I think those are probably two separate groups of people. To take a step back, when I was working for Speaker Boehner and the executive actions came down, I'm sure you all followed this too, but this turned into, this frankly caused this issue to suddenly, pop up in Congress again and kind of became the issue du jour. We almost shut down the Department of Homeland Security over it on a funding bill, and resulted, frankly, in resurgence of some really nasty immigration amendments to some particularly appropriations vehicles that we had managed to tamp down and avoid for a little while. And to be clear, the executive overreach issue is not isolated to immigration. I think that what our Republican members would say was that this was just the latest in the string of administration overreaches on a number of issues. You saw this in, from anywhere from something small like the designation of a wilderness in New Mexico right on the Mexican border that had been opposed by Congress for an extended period of time. You saw this with the waiving of a number of mandates under Obamacare. We saw this with some energy and climate change issues, a lot on energy issues. And so this had been a frustration with our members for a long time, and frankly was probably what they would say, the inability of this administration to enforce the law as written by Congress was the number one issue cited for why our Republican members didn't feel like we could move forward with immigration reform as a whole when we broached the subject at our Republican retreat in the beginning of 2014. The fact is that they cited all of these issues that I just listed previously and others to say, we could write the most perfect immigration bill that we could be happy with that would put all the resources in place to secure the border and legalize and do a temporary worker program. But as soon as the administration gets its hands on it, they're just going to ignore it and do whatever they want to do anyway. If you look at, if we take a really frank look at what would have been in place if we had implemented an immigration law. Let's say that we did do a 2-year delay on legalization while security measures were put in place, which is one of the things that people were talking about doing. Do you really think that the administration would have continued deporting people that were otherwise going to be legalized in 2 years during that 2-year window while we were supposedly putting our enforcement measures in place? Of course not. And there would have been probably a lot of court challenges if they'd tried to do it. So there is something to be said for that makes these concerns legitimate. Now that, I put that into one bucket, and I think that it's important to understand the context here. That this is not just about overreach on immigration, but this is about Republican members of Congress feeling like there was a pattern of abuse of power, and that we were hearing about this on a lot of issues prior to even the executive action taking place. But then that was kind of like the bomb on this issue. So then the question is, do Republicans feel the pressure to move on this issue? I think it obviously depends on which Republicans you're talking to. Republicans who are pro-reform, in my experience, are people who look at this issue in a very practical way, not frankly, in an emotional way. It's an economic issue. Our laws don't make sense, as David was saying. How do we practically find our way out of this hole that we've dug ourselves into? I think that it's interesting to see, how Republicans, having conversations between Republicans and Democrats around reform. Democrats tend to talk more about the personal side of it, the personal narrative, the personal story. Republicans really do focus on more the practical. That's why, and you look at the members who are advocates on this issue. Prime case, Speaker Ryan. He's a very practical guy. He's a strong economist. And I think, and while he's also a devout Catholic and is what we would call a compassionate conservative, I think that it seems to me that his main motivation and interest in this comes from one of practical movement. So, on the logistics sides of this, I think there's no question that this bill is going to have to go through the House of Representatives first. The Senate advocates, the Senate folks who've worked on this in the past have made it very clear that they're not going to get hung out to dry by the House of Representatives again. Having done this twice with them. So it's going to have to come through the House first. I think that practically it's going to be a Republican House. If you look at the election, it's going to narrow, but the Republicans are likely going to hold. So then you're looking at what Speaker Ryan is willing to do. And I really do think it does come down to him, whether he wants it to or not. And my question is, and I'm sure I'm going to get a Hillary question here in a minute, but I'll be honest that my concern on this is that if this is a first issue that President Clinton moves to, if she becomes president, I worry and I'm concerned that she will feel the need to overreach to the left to appease some of the Bernie voters and that flank, and that unfortunately immigration would end up being maybe a bit of a sacrificial lamb in that case, because it really is going to have to be, in order to get it through the House of Representatives, really is going to have to truly be bipartisan and moderate in nature. If it's an extreme reach to the left, it's going to shut down our folks that are even willing to approach and talk on this issue. So, unfortunately, I love Casey and I love Speaker Ryan, and I hate to put them in this position, but I really do think this is going to fall at his feet in 2017.
So let's assume it falls at his feet. What is the likelihood that he will come up with a proposal which is going to have bipartisan support?
I think if anybody can do it, he can. But I think it's going to be a challenge. It's going to be a real challenge. I think it also has to. I think that Speaker Ryan is enjoying being Speaker Ryan more than Speaker Ryan thought he would. And I think that the big question is, does he want to be Speaker Ryan for 2 more terms, or is he all in the next year to 2 years on his speakership? We saw this a little bit with Speaker Boehner, right? So when they brought me on to work on this issue, everybody knew and was assuming that Speaker Boehner was getting ready to be, staring down the end of his tenure. And this was his effort this was one of his legacy issues that he really wanted to get done. Now, some things like an Eric Cantor loss and some the pressure at the border from Central America kind of derailed those efforts for us. But I think Speaker Ryan is sincere about wanting to do this. I also worry that as this election moves forward, we potentially lose some of our moderates. That the conference becomes more polarized, and so the question is, what does that vote count look like? Currently, the Republicans can get anything off the House floor if they don't lose more than 28 of their fellow Republicans. I think that fraction will be significantly smaller, and like I said, it'll be more of a concentration. We're not losing a lot of Freedom Caucus folks in this election. We've lost one, but we're not probably going to lose a lot more. They're in pretty safe seats. We're going to potentially lose somebody, I really hope none of this is true, but somebody like a John Katko, or hopefully not a Will Hurd, or hopefully not a Martha McSally, who have the potential to be really real champions on this. Those are the seats that are the most questionable. You see it in the Senate too. If you look at risk, you've got Rob Portman, Kelly Ayotte, John McCain, who are people whose votes we need on this to get it done. So it's a plus, or it's a troubling outlook as far as bipartisan work if this Congress becomes even more polarized than it is now.
And I take it if possibly President Clinton decides to do executive action on this again, that precludes any possibility of Republicans moving on either House or Senate?
I do believe that. I think that the thing that could be most harmful for the effort of actually getting reform, long-term reform done is further executive action. The one thing I've always thought, the Clintons are very good at working with Congress, not to generalize them as a unit, but they have always historically, the first President Clinton had built strong relationships with Congress. And I would assume that if Hillary's elected, that she would do the same. And I think that's going to be really important for this administration, is to do some, I know that there are obviously historical tensions between Secretary Clinton and the House Republicans, but doing some significant relationship building like former President Clinton did, I think would be helpful. I would really hope that she would try to work those relationships and try to put a really moderate, middle of the road proposal first through regular channels, through regular process, like President Bush did in 2007, really work hand in hand with Congress to get a proposal forward. If that doesn't get done, then obviously I find executive action more likely. But if we're talking, a lot of the things that have been brought up today, a lot of the issues that Cristina mentioned, continued executive action isn't a long-term solution for this, right? If we don't have a President Trump this time around, who knows who will be president for 8, 12 years. And so I think we're probably all in agreement up here that there needs to be some kind of real permanent solution. And the best way to do that is to work with Congress to get it done. Though I understand, probably few people know this better than I have, as all the iterations that I've been through on immigration reform in Congress. It's obviously a frustrating and challenging proposal, but look at the folks who've been working on healthcare reform since the 90s. Those big pieces of legislation take a long time to do. And unfortunately, that seems to be kind of where we are in this pattern at the moment.
Great. Again, just to be completely nonpartisan, let's assume President Trump is the president. How do you think the Republicans and Congress are going to behave on this issue?
I think it's going to be interesting, because I actually am of the camp that and I've been fairly public with my Trump criticism. So I to be fair, I actually don't think that Trump's going to follow through on any of these things that he has put forward. I think it's going to be to the incredible frustration of a lot of these members of Congress who have been throwing their weight behind him for the last few months, particularly Senator Sessions and the like. I think he actually, at the end of the day, has probably much more moderate views on immigration than he's putting out there on the campaign trail, but he just can't help the love and affection that the hardliners are giving him. He loves that cheer time he starts talking about the wall at his events. And I think, a lot of this is going to come down to cost, right? We're either going to have a very, very tightly divided Senate, or we're going to have a Democrat-controlled Senate, most likely. Are we going to be able to be pushing appropriations through, even if they come out of the House with increased numbers on enforcement and increased Border Patrol agent numbers? Are the Democrats going to pass those? Likely not. I just think that, frankly, I think a lot of this is playing to the crowds. And there's also a question as to whether or not he really understands what would need to go into doing a lot of these things, the practical legal side of it. So I think it's a lot of hullabaloo. I just don't think that at the end of the day a lot is going to come from it. Though I know that doesn't give a lot. The folks that are impacted by this, their everyday lives impacted by this, I know that doesn't give them a lot of comfort. But that's just my personal opinion, to be frank.
That's all we want. Okay, folks, those will take questions on this side and that side. And while you're lining up, let me get David to respond to Becky's possibility of something working in the House in your capacity as having worked on the House?
Okay, I will answer that, but that means that I am going to step out of my role.
Giving you vacation.
Yeah, I'm going to speak completely not from the Department of Homeland Security, but based on my personal experiences when I used to work in the House. So let me say that I can't think of anything I disagreed with right now. There may be one or two things that Becky said, but I agree with almost everything she said. I spent 7.5 years in the House. Most of that time was in working with one gang or another in the room with well-meaning members of the Republican side who really wanted to get something done. And so I believe that the will to do something is really out there. It's hard as a Democrat until you really spend time with them to understand the pressures they're under. They want to do the right thing. They are pragmatic, but they have a base that they have to deal with as well. And until it's really time to do something, it's at least their calculation, it doesn't make sense to be extraordinarily public about it. And I get that. What's also been extraordinarily clear to me is that Republicans largely need two things, particularly in the House. I have little time and no time in the Senate. So, but they need to have a better feeling that our border is secure and that our laws are being followed. I think they need that. They need to feel like, we're going to have rule of law someday, and that we're going to have real border enforcement efforts, and they need to feel reasonably assured that this isn't going to happen all over again the way it did last time, that 10 years from now there aren't going to be 11 million people. That's really what they want. And I understood that when I was there, and I understand why they want it. I understand, to be honest, I think it's a fair ask from their side. So the question is, can we figure out a way to come to the center and figure out how to deliver those two things and have a system that works for the country and that takes care of those that are the undocumented that are here, because I think they're willing to do that as well. That's not easily done. I know that, but I do. People that know me from my prior time know that I was always the pessimist, right? I was the one that was always saying, "All right, this is not going to happen," when a lot of other people did think it was going to happen. Partly because I was in the room and I knew what it would take. But I'm optimistic now, and like I've been in the past. So I think as long as both sides can come together and can give, it can be done.
Okay, folks, well, Becky and David both stay optimistic. Let's get them.
You guys will shoot us down now.
All right. I actually don't know if I really projected optimism, but I appreciate it.
Well, you said it was possible. That's good.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'll take that.
Okay. Any questions from the mics?
We answered every question.
Amazing. So in
I think it's the end of a long day, and maybe people are ready.
yeah, it was a set of long days. But Cristina and Steve, do you want to give any closing comments to the audience about how you see this unfold for the rest of the year and next?
No. I can't think of anything insightful to add, and that hasn't usually stopped me in the past. But
I know I should have just taken the optimistic note on David and Becky and closing. And Christine, did I?
Yeah, I think that, just from the sort of advocacy and organizing perspective to the last 2 points that Becky and David raised about the feasibility and what we look at, the possibilities in 2017. I would say that looking back, the theory that working on a Senate bill and that will create momentum and that will lead to the House taking action, it was totally flawed. And I'm not, our organization is independent. We hold both parties accountable, so I'm not taking either side. It's more from the analysis and the work that we have done with our own strategists who are our members. And so what it's clear here, the question for us is what's going to be different in 2017 that will really make this possibility a reality? And a couple of factors, I think it's Ryan, and also the community and the role that the community will play in showing up for Election Day in November. And I know many of you here are doing work for that, including ourselves. But also, what is going to be the impact of the election, both on Democrats and Republicans, on this issue? And I think that for the community, what's clear is that we can go one with the same strategies that have been used in the past, but rather really take a look at the power that we have and do our power analysis and our homework to be able to hold those folks accountable and push them to solutions. Because ultimately, as Becky said, we need solutions that are permanent, and also at the same time, our community needs a win and needs some relief ASAP.
Great, thank you. And let me take this opportunity to thank David, Steve, Cristina, and Becky for taking the time and for concluding this conference on this extremely important topic. This is the last panel of the day. Thank you to all of you for spending your entire day with us. Hope you found it useful. Before you all go, let me thank the people who never get thanked enough, for people who make this thing possible behind the scenes. There are a number of people from clinic, Jerusha, Hassan Ritter, Emily Hawk, and Ashley Feasley in particular, who put a lot of effort in getting all of you to your seats. To Andy Schoenholz, our host from Georgetown, thanks. And to Lisa Dixon, who really is the force behind all this, along with our communications director, Michelle Middlestadt, who make all this thing look so easy. Thank you very much, and we'll all see you at the 14th LAPC conference.